Hi, I'm Brianna Sealy, producer for OffScrip Health. Welcome to the Heart of Healthcare. Before we get started today, I'd like to tell you another show in the OffScrip Health podcast network, The Cycle. The Cycle is a podcast about endometriosis. Join host Melissa Boudreau in listening to the stories from people all over the world and learn helpful information about the disease and ways to cope with it. Check out the latest episode, Across the Pond with Elva, where Elva tells us about her surgeries, the ups and downs of having endometriosis, and surgery tips for when you're in the hospital. For more information, visit offscrip.com/shows. The link will be in our show notes. Enjoy the show.
August is Breastfeeding Month, and this year it hits different. We have faced a severe shortage of infant formula, with an out-of-stock rate surging to 70%. Just breastfeed is a common refrain, but that's not so easy. Not everyone can breastfeed for a variety of reasons, and we don't exactly make it easy for working mothers. In today's episode, I'm talking to Dr. Leila Strickland, a biologist and scientific communicator and co-founder of Biomilq. Biomilq is a woman-owned, Bill Gates-funded infant nutrition company producing cultured breast milk in a lab. All right, Leila, welcome to the Heart of Healthcare.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
I want to open up with the recent formula shortage that has become a crisis for families in the U.S. Can you explain what happened here?
I have some thoughts to share. It's certainly been just dramatic and unsettling to watch this situation unfold. And I think it's really revealed some fundamental problems with how we produce these products for babies in the United States. We have a nation's entire supply of infant formula produced in just a few facilities. We have a lot of pretty extensive restrictions on infant formula import that have left us isolated and vulnerable to any sort of disruption of our own domestic supply. And of course, the pandemic that we've all been experiencing over the last several years has created really unprecedented challenges for manufacturing, and including, the interface with government oversight and inspections that are intended to ensure public safety. And then I guess finally, I'm sure we're all seeing the news, and it appears that there may have been some organizational issues that created conditions that also put safety at risk, with a whistleblower report that came out in June. So, at Biomilq, we're paying really close attention to the outcomes of the ongoing investigations into that scenario, watching closely for Sturgis plant to come back online. And we're keeping tabs on discussions that we see happening on Capitol Hill that have been prompted by this crisis. It's put a lot of families into a pretty precarious position. But I suppose that if we can take anything hopeful away from it, it's really shined a light on an issue that really hasn't gotten the attention that it needs in order to avoid some of these probably inevitable problems that would occur when we have just such bottlenecks around how we produce food for babies.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a very scary time for these families, and I feel like the answers that families are getting aren't that helpful. It's like, talk to your pediatrician. Don't do this. Don't do that. Don't water down milk. Talk to your pediatrician. I can't imagine how pediatricians are handling this.
Yeah, I'm sure pediatricians are inundated with questions. Anybody who has any relationship with feeding babies in this country, I'm sure is overwhelmed and has been through this period. And you see all kinds of responses. And I think more than anybody, it's parents and people who feed babies who are scrambling when they see these empty aisles in the grocery stores. And it's really scary when you have babies who are dependent on particular formulations to meet their needs. And even with, some of the metabolic conditions that really require certain products that are really life or death situations for some people.
So speaking of feeding babies, breastfeeding in public wasn't legal in all 50 states until 2018. Why? I mean, this is just so symbolic of the mom shaming and stigma around feeding your baby.
Yeah. Yeah, it's stunning. I even as I was in the lead up to founding Biomilq, I remember being at a restaurant having a conversation with my sister about my plans for this company, and was confronted by a man who was having dinner with his family and told me that they couldn't even stand to eat overhearing me talking about breastfeeding, let alone doing it in public.
He was offended by the thought of someone feeding a baby.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
So disgusted that he couldn't eat. Amazing.
So disgusted. Yeah. So it's out there. I mean, these are real experiences that women are having. My mom has told me the story many times, even, over 40 years ago, of breastfeeding me and being confronted by another woman in a restaurant, stating that I was ruining her appetite. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how do you feel about Facebook banning photos of breastfeeding mothers, but obviously a lot of other images that they accept?
I think it's really sad and really sort of part of a much bigger picture around just stigmatization and polarization and politicization of women's bodies that we're seeing happening in many spheres of women's health right now. And I think it's really disappointing.
Has it always been this way? Has there always been stigma, or is this a modern day phenomenon?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a historian, so I think that, but I do think, we've seen changes in attitudes to breastfeeding over time, certainly, and corresponding changes in how folks see formula feeding and other choices for how you might feed your infant, and certainly, current attitudes and trends are definitely influenced by other aspects of the climate. And I think right now, we're at a moment where we've seen decades of progress for women entering the workforce and contributing and participating in and accessing the economy in ways that, in other generations weren't available. But we haven't seen the same kind of structural shifts that would be needed to actually help women achieve the recommendations around breastfeeding. And so that's resulted in a lot of burden on the individual shoulders of mothers to figure out how to navigate that. And it's not surprising that individuals confronted with this recommendation that this is the best way to feed your baby, but then also an absence of resources and support for how to do that. It's unsurprising that individuals feel shame and guilt about the predicament that they find themselves in.
Absolutely. I mean, so we know that the most important factor in predicting whether and how long an American mother will breastfeed is whether she plans to return to work. And unfortunately, we're one of the only countries in the world without federally mandated paid maternity leave.
Right.
With 30% of new mothers having no maternity leave at all. And this obviously impacts single women or women in lower paying jobs the most. So we really can't talk about breastfeeding without talking about maternity leave. You mentioned kind of what are the systemic challenges. This seems like probably the biggest one.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And of course, you can't start to talk about that without bringing up just sort of the disparities that in how that issue just confronts the population. Women of color are the most likely to be in positions where they're the sole breadwinner for a household, and unsurprisingly have the lowest rates of extensive breastfeeding.
Yeah, and then I mean your options aren't great, right? Like formula is really expensive, so you either return to your low-paying job without the ability to breastfeed your child full time, but pay a fortune for formula.
Yes, exactly.
Or you don't go to work. I mean, you're really stuck in between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's so important to draw attention to these things now. And perhaps this is one other sort of silver lining of the formula shortage that we're in right now, is that we can start to see, it makes visible these problems
Yeah.
for policymakers and others who perhaps haven't paid enough attention.
Yeah. So August is breastfeeding month, and this is really when you hear a lot of breast is best, what I call propaganda. But lately, we've been hearing from others, researchers like Emily Oster, who's suggesting that maybe breastfeeding is overrated. Maybe we need to consider consider breastfeeding more holistically. Curious your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I definitely don't have the authority to answer the question of what is the best way to feed your baby. I'm not a clinician or a doctor, but I am a mother and have used infant formula to feed my own children as well as breast milk. And I think both of those options have trade-offs, and it's really important for parents to decide what is best for their family given the circumstances. And a lot of the emphasis on the importance or benefits of breastfeeding really doesn't take into consideration the trade-offs that decision may result in for families in different circumstances and situations. And so you get this kind of monolithic message that this is the best way to feed your baby. Almost any parent would want what's best for their baby, so that's very appealing.
Yeah.
And so, but that the evidence that's based on perhaps is not as strong as is being represented, and perhaps also is not considering important factors like the mental health of the mother, and the challenges that she may face.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine if a woman is stressed, sleep deprived, there
Yeah.
are negative impacts on her parenting and on that child that might be even greater than the impact of using formula versus being breastfed.
Absolutely. To make things even more complicated by thinking about the biology of lactation a little bit, which is unfortunately just a strongly neglected area of research. What we have begun to see is that stress really affects milk supply. So it's a vicious circle of factors that are, like you said, not helping and likely impeding one's ability to even physiologically continue breastfeeding.
Yeah. So nutrition science is notoriously hard for adults because people eat a variety of foods each day. It's really hard to run the studies comparing, the difference in drinking one milk versus the other. But babies eat one thing. So I would assume there's a lot of research comparing babies who are formula fed versus breastfed.
Yeah, of course there is, one point, I'll make 2 points here. One is that, to say that babies eat one thing and that's breast milk is a misunderstanding of breast milk. There are no two samples of breast milk that are identical on the planet.
Point.
Every single mouthful of breast milk is distinct and unique in its composition. And that composition arises from a number of aspects of the physiology that produced it, some of which are evolutionarily geared towards the support of the development of the infant, but also many of which are evolutionarily geared towards the preservation of the mother's resources and protection of her investment in creating that product. So it's really a two-directional relationship, and the mother's body itself is also managing these trade-offs. Her investment is enormous in order to produce this substance. And so the substance is by definition really dynamic and pretty undefined, which makes it hard to study compositionally. Just the human milk research field, and even characterizing what is breast milk. It's one of the stumper questions I like to ask people who are interviewing for a job at Biomilq is, what is milk? Because it's a very easy question to ask and a complicated one to answer. But then beyond that, of course, you're right. There are plenty of clinical studies and a long history of clinical studies trying to compare breastfeeding to infant formula. And, there's certainly data showing some differences in how babies grow or how those two different feeding modalities affect digestion and things like this, nutrient absorption. But those studies are also really limited in some ways because you really can't perform a randomized controlled trial in the same way that, we expect for pharmaceuticals in an ethical way, because you can't randomize babies and mothers to conditions where, okay, you're going to smoke cigarettes for 6 months and we're going to see how that affects your baby. Or you're going to, you can't dictate in a clinical trial setting what the treatment groups are. So you have to go for observational studies with self-selected populations, and you're often bringing along a lot of confounding factors into those population groups then, and some of the correlations that we already discussed around mothers who are more likely to be breastfeeding or not can definitely impact the results of those trials, and makes it a more complicated nest to try to unwind and figure out what are the actual benefits of breastfeeding.
So there was that Ohio State study a few years ago where they looked at over 1,500 pairs of siblings that were raised in the same family but fed differently, and they found that there was virtually no difference in terms of BMI, obesity, intelligence, hyperactivity. They were looking at a number of things. I thought that one was really interesting.
Yeah. And, I think there have been quite a few studies similar to that, or that have reached similar conclusions. I think particularly around these long-term outcomes and aspects that are measured, long after the period of breastfeeding has ended, and trying to correlate that back to how the baby was fed as an infant and isolate that effect from other factors that are likely present in that child's life and circumstances is really, really difficult. And so it's interesting, like you said, when you look farther out and you see that the differences really diminish.
Yeah. Well, and how do we know that breastfeeding benefits are from the chemical composition of the human milk versus the mother-child interaction at the breast?
Yeah, I think that's also another interesting question. I think from there, you have to really get into thinking about things like you've got to get specific about what endpoints and effects you're really talking about. You can't just put all the effects or possible benefits into one big bucket called benefits of breastfeeding and draw a conclusion about that. You can look at like the infant microbiome and the maturation of the intestinal tract and the gut as the baby adapts to feeding orally rather than through the placenta and umbilical cord in utero. And you can look at growth metrics and other aspects, even stool frequency and things like this. But it's really challenging to just create one big category of benefits and then draw a conclusion about that. So you've really got to get specific. Yeah. There are certainly inferences that can be made by studying the components that we do see in breast milk. But again, we're relying on correlative data for the most part, more so than data that allows us to make conclusions about the causes of the effects that we're seeing.
We'll be right back after the break.
Has your chronic illness made it difficult to continue working in the traditional way? Want to learn how to find and create flexible remote work that both accommodates your chronic illness and generates an income? Join the Patients Getting Paid membership, a community of chronicpreneurs where people just like you find workshops and trainings, weekly updated condition-specific gigs, twice monthly coaching calls, co-workings, accountability, and the kindest community to support you on your path to make money while working from anywhere and taking good care of yourself. Learn more or join us at patientsgettingpaid.com.
So tell us about Biomilq and your journey to founding this company.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Biomilk is really a long time in the making for me. I have a background in cell biology and studied cell biology in graduate school and spent some time as a postdoctoral researcher. Was always working on questions related to how cells control processes in order to determine our physiology. And I became a mother really in the last year of my postdoc, about six months before my postdoc ended, and really was taken aback by how challenging breastfeeding turned out to be for me. I had taken all the classes on parenting and done my best to prepare myself for what I was about to experience as a new mom, but really had taken for granted that breastfeeding was probably what I would do and hadn't thought much more about it until I was home with my newborn baby and he was hungry and I had him on the breast all the time and he was never satisfied. And it was just a really stressful period where I felt like I wasn't making enough milk for him. And he was losing weight, and mainly the advice I was given was, well, just keep trying. Your milk supply will increase based on his demand, and whatever you do, don't give him a bottle or a pacifier. Just keep putting him on your breast, and then keep pumping whenever he's not on your breast. So you get into this 24-hour kind of round-the-clock management of your milk supply, and a lot of emotional distress that went along with that. So, I had many hours attached to a breast pump, and as a scientist, sort of extracted from the lab during this period, I sort of took to the scientific literature to try to understand what was going on. Why might my body be struggling to produce this substance to feed my child? And learned about milk production very quickly, that it actually is a process very similar to other processes I'd been studying in my research, using mammalian cell culture as a model. And so my mind just started turning on whether or not you could model lactation in vitro and use cell culture to produce something that was like breast milk. And if you could do that at scale, could you treat that as an infant nutrition option? And, the thought evolved over time, but by 2013, I was second-time mother, less probably emotionally distressed, but certainly still having the same experience of challenge feeding my daughter now. And decided to go ahead and try to grow mammary cells to test out some of my ideas, or at least see if they responded to cell culture the way that I thought they might. And so, just in a very independent and limited capacity, I was able to grow some cells from bovine udders, actually. I would go to the slaughterhouse to get the material and bring it back to the lab and see if I could grow the cells and look at what they looked like and see how long they could last in culture and some basic things like this. But, at the time, I really didn't know how to start a biotech company. I did not know really how to communicate about this in a way that would inspire other people to get behind.
What was your day job then?
I was working in scientific communications. At the time I was working editing manuscripts for scholarly publishing.
Okay.
And so I could do that remotely. It was a very flexible option. And so I could just kind of take my laptop down to this little lab I had and kind of hammer out some work in between taking a look at the cells I was trying to grow. And so I did that for a bit, but ended up after 3 or 4 years, kind of unable to get any real support behind it, and really, frankly, kind of burning out on my own sort of lonely work there. I had 2 small kids, and I needed some stability in my life and perhaps a better paycheck. And so I transitioned into pharma, really working in scientific communications for pharmaceutical companies, and learned a bit more about scientific storytelling and sort of the strategy behind product development and things like this. Also learned a lot about cell culture products that are being produced for introduction into the human body, and the systems that are being used for that to make, for example, monoclonal antibodies and things like this. And so that was further fodder for thinking about, well, what would a system look like if I wanted to put my favorite type of cell into it and see what product it secretes, which is hopefully something like human milk. What would that look like? And so that led to thinking about, sort of a proof of concept experiment that ultimately was able to contract a lab to perform for me in 2019. And at this point, I had met my co-founder, Michelle Egger, whose background and skill set, she's a business MBA graduate from Duke and has a lot of passion for maternal and infant health, had been working at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and conveniently also has a degree in food science and had spent time in dairy processing. So she knows a lot about milk.
Gosh. Yeah.
So we fit together
with your two powers combined.
Yeah, exactly. So we teamed up informally in 2019, and that helped inspire me to get this proof of concept experiment contracted and run, gave us a little bit of exciting data that was helpful in starting to tap into Michelle's networks and be able to get some support for this. So we were able to incorporate in January of 2020, and really it's kind of been
great timing.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Right.
Jeez. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but we didn't slow down. We really just, everybody always asks, what's it like starting a biotech company along with the pandemic? And I really don't know any other way to do it. It's the only experience I have. So I think it's great.
Yeah. And then who's like the ideal customer? Like what's going on in their life where Biomilk is the best option for them?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the ideal customer is somebody who finds herself persuaded that there may be some benefits to human milk, or at least the bioactives and nutrient components that are present there that are damaged through the processing of infant formula, or just simply not present in the bovine milk or soy protein basis that those products are formulated from. But also is a person who, for any reason really, which is none of my business, is unable to or uninterested in extensive and exclusive breastfeeding for that exclusivity period of at least 6 months that's recommended clinically. And so, somebody who is finding themselves in that middle zone where there are no options currently between breastfeeding and breast milk and infant formula.
Will this be something that you're going to try to get the cost closer to formula? Because right now I imagine it's more, just because you're kind of more of a boutique one-off.
Yeah. And right now it's not available, and it's a long ways off from even having a price tag put on it and entering into the marketplace. But that's something that's really, really important to us. And so when we do our economic modeling and try to make technical plans for our launch of a product, our intention is certainly to launch a product that's price competitive with infant formula, and realistically probably competing with higher end infant formulas, the higher tier of infant formulas currently, but with increased scale would be able to come down and be widely accessible. I really believe that this product won't have the impact in the world that I envision it having if it's only ever available to wealthy women. In fact, I see that it could perpetuate inequalities in that case more so than address them.
Yeah. And it's going to be personalized to the parent.
That's an idea we've talked about in the past, and I think at this point that's a very long ways off and probably not scalable. I think we haven't run into any reason in our research to think that that's not technically possible, but I don't see it ever being practical or scalable in order to reach as many parents as we'd like to be able to.
So it's really the value proposition is that it is human milk. Yeah. So similar to going to, perhaps if you're not able to breastfeed and you have to go to the local what's the milk bank? Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
At your local hospital. This is helping kind of scale the availability of human milk.
Yeah, exactly.
Human-like milk. Mm-hmm.
Yes, something similar to human milk. And that's there's always some hand waving there as well. I always think it's important to emphasize that at this point, as we are understanding the products that we're making, we need to note that there are many differences between cell cultured human milk, which is really sort of the technical way I refer to it, and breast milk. It's not breast milk. I get really irritated when journalists insist that it's lab-made breast milk, and it's not breast milk, but it's also not infant formula. It's something different. It's a very novel option, which is part of why we expect long timelines to be able to release it. It's gonna have a lot of hurdles to clear in order to get there. But there are a number of fundamental differences between what we would make in breast milk, and one of those is the absence of those real-time dynamics that you see in the composition of breast milk. I mentioned earlier that breast milk is fundamentally dynamic and variable and undefined, and we're trying to manufacture a product that's going to hit certain specifications batch to batch so that we can make sure that every bottle that we release is safe. And so in that way, it's more like infant formula because it needs to be consistent and standardized. And that's very different from what breast milk is.
Yeah. So interesting. And when do you guys think you'll be able to launch?
Oh, that's also always a really hard question that I hate to answer because it's, we have a lot to do. I would say we're, from a technical standpoint, we're probably 3 to 5 years off from having a product that sort of satisfies some of those requirements for consistency and standardization and scalability that I've already referred to. But there's also just a lot of unknown territory ahead in terms of the regulatory scenario for a product like this. Of course, infants are the most protected class of consumers, and rightly so. And so we wouldn't dream of releasing a product before we have satisfied to our own and anyone else's full satisfaction that it's safe and can achieve the claims that we would like to be able to make. And so, from that standpoint, it's quite a few years off. And so for that reason, we see a lot of opportunity between now and the launch of this product for use as an infant nutrition product into other markets and perhaps other formats as well.
Like what?
Oh, we think you sort of oral supplementation, or you think about, one of the conversations we've had a lot is that the digestive challenges that are faced by aging populations are fairly similar in many ways to populations of babies as their digestive tracts are maturing. You have an immature digestive tract, and in aging populations, you begin to have sort of a more permeable digestive tract as well. And we think that based on some of the components we see in our products, that there could be some effects on promoting on gut permeability, basically. So perhaps in aging populations or in other populations who have issues with gut permeability, there may be better opportunities to try out this product. And that would give perhaps maybe just some more comfort for people. I think it's a huge ask for people to think about feeding this brand new, totally novel product to their child in the earliest days of their lives. And I don't think it's fair to expect parents to sign up to be the first recipients of that product.
Yeah. But maybe the grandparents can be. Yes. And then verify it give the parents more comfort. So interesting. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to share?
No, this has been a fun conversation. We've touched on a lot of the things that are really important and interesting to me.
What's the best way for people to follow along on Biomilq and your guys' progress?
Yeah, well, we have our website is biomilq.com, and we do keep a running blog there where we frequently write about issues in lactation science or milk science, and always have job postings there. We're always growing and moving quickly. And so if people are interested in seeing what openings are available at the time, that's the place to look as well. And then we're all over social media as well in Facebook and Instagram and all of those venues.
Amazing. Well, Layla, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Heart of Healthcare. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, follow us on social, and tell all your friends to listen. The Heart of Healthcare is a product of OffScrip Health. We are a healthcare engagement company built for patients and caregivers by patients and caregivers. Our executive producers are Matthew Zachary and Andrew McDowell. Our senior producer is Brianna Seeley. Our intern is Antonella Sterniolo. Our host is Hallie Tecco. It is recorded, mixed, and edited by Brianna Seeley. For advertising and media inquiries, email media@offscrip.com. That's media@offscrip.com. For more information, visit offscrip.com.